On my 68th birthday, my son sat me down in the kitchen of the restaurant I helped him build and said, "Mom, we think it's best if you don't join us for the investor dinner tonight. You know how you are with the stories." So I smiled, wiped my hands on the apron I had worn for 40 years, and quietly began documenting every recipe I had ever given him. Recipes he was now claiming as his own to impress critics and investors, recipes that had earned his restaurant a Michelin star nomination, recipes worth the $800,000 I had invested and the $3.2 million inheritance he was counting on. "But it's my birthday," I said softly, looking at Daniel, my only son, the boy I had raised between double shifts and culinary school loans. He sighed like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. "Mom, these people are serious. They're considering a franchise deal. We can't have you at the table talking about the old days and how you used to do things. It's not that vibe." His wife, Brittany, stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding along like a backup dancer. "We'll save you a plate, Maggie. You understand, right? This is business." I understood perfectly. I understood that the sac au vin they would serve tonight was my grandmother's recipe, the one I had perfected over 30 years. I understood that the signature butternut squash ravioli on their fall menu was something I had created on a Tuesday afternoon in 2003 when Daniel was still in high school. I understood that every dish that made critics write words like innovative and genius had come from my hands first, my brain first, my heart first. I also understood that I was being erased. So I went to my small studio apartment, the one I had moved into after selling my house to help finance his dream, and I did what any woman who had spent 4 decades in professional kitchens would do. I started taking notes. Every recipe, every technique, every story behind every dish. I photographed the margins of my old cookbooks where I had scribbled modifications. I dug out the manuscript of my cookbook from 1994, the one that had been a bestseller before I gave up my own restaurant to raise Daniel alone after his father died. That night, while Daniel poured wine for investors and accepted compliments on his culinary vision, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by evidence, proof that I was not just his mother, I was his foundation, his source code, his unacknowledged co-author, in every success he claimed as solely his own. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone used to call me Maggie. For 23 years, I was the executive chef and owner of Maggie's Table, a restaurant in Seattle that was legendary before Seattle became what it is now. We weren't fancy, not in the way restaurants are fancy today, with the mood lighting and the Instagram walls. We were serious. We had 2 James Beard nominations, a write-up in Bon Appetit that called me the godmother of Pacific Northwest comfort cuisine, and a line out the door 6 nights a week. I could break down a chicken in under 2 minutes. I could tell the temperature of a sauce by sound alone. I had trained under people whose names are still spoken with reverence in culinary schools. I was not playing at this. This was my language, my religion, my identity. But when my husband collapsed in our kitchen from a heart attack on a Sunday morning in 2003, when the paramedics couldn't save him, when I held Daniel, then just 15, while he sobbed into my chef's coat, I made a choice. I sold the restaurant, I took the money and I put it into Daniel's future, his education, his dreams. He wanted to be a chef, too. Of course he did. He had grown up in my kitchen, had watched me create, had tasted the difference between good and transcendent. So I supported him. I paid for culinary school. I connected him with my old colleagues. I gave him my recipes, not just the ones in the cookbook, but the secret ones, the ones that only existed in my muscle memory and in the margins of my brain. When he told me he wanted to open his own place in Portland, I was proud. When he asked me to invest, I didn't hesitate. I gave him $800,000, nearly everything I had left after selling Maggie's Table, after paying for his education, after keeping us afloat for all those years. He promised me partnership. "Mom, this is our dream together," he said. "You'll be consulting chef. Your name will be right there with mine." But that's not what happened. What happened was, I became the invisible woman in the kitchen of a restaurant built on my money and my recipes. What happened was Daniel slowly, methodically began to erase my contribution. First, it was small things. The partnership paperwork kept getting delayed. "The lawyers are backed up," he'd say. Then my name disappeared from the menu credits. "We're going for a cleaner look," Brittany explained. Then it became bigger. I would suggest a dish, we would develop it together, and 2 weeks later it would appear on the menu with no acknowledgement. When I mentioned it, Daniel would shrug. "Mom, we collaborated on everything here. We can't credit every conversation." But they weren't conversations. They were my recipes, my techniques, my lifetime of knowledge being repackaged as his innovation. I started working in the kitchen, not as a partner, but as what they called support staff. I prepped vegetables, I made stocks, I showed the young cooks how to properly season a pan. And when food critics came, when investors visited, when important people walked through those doors, I was asked to stay in the back. "It confuses the narrative," Brittany told me once, not even bothering to sound apologetic. "People want to see a young, visionary chef. If they know your mom is back there doing all the foundational work, it takes away from Daniel's brand." His brand, built on my bones. The real breaking point came 6 months before my 68th birthday. A food critic from the Oregonian came for dinner. She ordered the mushroom Wellington, a dish I had created in 1997 and had taught Daniel to make when he was 17. It was in my cookbook, photographed and credited to me. The critic loved it. She asked to meet the chef. Daniel went out, full of smiles and charm. I watched from the kitchen window as she asked him about the dish. "Where did this recipe come from? It's extraordinary." I held my breath. This was his chance to acknowledge me, to tell the truth, to say, "My mother created this." Instead, he laughed and said, "I developed it last year. I was really focused on elevating traditional techniques with modern sensibility. It took about 40 tries to get it right." 40 tries. I had perfected that recipe over 6 years. I had tested it in my own restaurant, had served it to hundreds of people, had published it in a book that sat on shelves across the country. And he took credit for it, like he had invented breathing. The review came out the following week. "Chef Daniel Sullivan," it read, "is a rare talent, creating dishes that feel both timeless and innovative. His mushroom Wellington is a masterclass in technique and flavor. Not a single mention of me, not even a inspired by or family recipe, nothing." I saved that review. I printed it out and I put it in a folder that was growing thicker by the week. Then came my 68th birthday. I had been working in the kitchen all day, breaking down ducks, making demi-glace, teaching a new cook how to properly dice an onion. I wasn't expecting a party. I knew better by then, but I thought maybe we could have dinner together. Just the 3 of us. Maybe the grandkids could come over. Instead, Brittany pulled me aside around 4 in the afternoon. "So, tonight's actually really important. Daniel has those investors coming in, the ones from San Francisco. They're looking at franchising opportunities." "Okay," I said. "What time should I be ready?" She blinked at me like I had asked to speak to the moon. "Oh, Maggie, you're not coming. This is a business dinner. Very formal, very strategic. It's my birthday." "I know, and we'll celebrate this weekend, I promise. But tonight is about the restaurant's future, you understand." I did understand. I understood that I was an embarrassment. Too old, too outdated, too much of a reminder that Daniel hadn't built this alone. That night, I ate leftover soup in my apartment. Soup I had made from bones I had roasted that morning in their kitchen, and I decided that understanding was no longer enough. I started small. I created a TikTok account under the name The Invisible Chef. No face, no real name, just my hands and my voice. In the first video, I showed how to make a proper bechamel sauce, the foundation of so many dishes. I talked while I worked, explaining the technique that takes years to perfect. "People will tell you this is simple," I said to the camera. And it is, once you've made it 10,000 times, once you've burned it and fixed it, once you've taught it to someone who then claimed they invented it. I posted it at midnight and went to sleep. By morning, it had 200,000 views. The comments were full of people saying they finally understood something they'd been doing wrong for years. Culinary students thanked me. Home cooks said my voice was soothing. Professional chefs argued in the comments about my technique, which meant they were watching, which meant I was being heard. I made another video, this time about how to properly break down a chicken. "This is a skill they don't teach anymore," I said, "because it's easier to buy pre-cut pieces, but when you do it yourself, When you understand the anatomy, the structure, you respect the ingredient more. And respect is something we're losing. Another 300,000 views. More comments. People started calling me Grandma Chef even though I never showed my face. They started asking questions, requesting specific techniques, sharing my videos with the hashtag number #InvisibleChef. Within 3 weeks, I had 800,000 followers. Food publications started writing articles. Who is the Invisible Chef? Culinary websites analyzed my techniques. Young chefs on TikTok made response videos, confirming that yes, this was the old school way, the correct way, the way it should be taught. And then I got bolder. I made a video about my mushroom Wellington. I showed every step, explained the history of the dish, talked about the 6 years it took me to perfect it. I didn't mention Daniel or the restaurant. I didn't have to. But I did say this. I created this in 1997. It was published in my cookbook, Maggie's Kitchen, in 1998. If you see it on a menu somewhere, being called innovative or modern, know that it's neither. It's mine. It's always been mine. The food world started putting pieces together. Someone found my old cookbook on Amazon. Someone else found the review of Daniel's restaurant, found the dish on his menu, found the photographs that looked suspiciously similar. Reddit threads appeared. Is the Invisible Chef Daniel Sullivan's mother? Food blogs started investigating. They dug up my old interviews, my old restaurant reviews, my James Beard nominations. They compared my cookbook to his menu. The overlap was impossible to ignore. And still, Daniel had no idea. He didn't follow TikTok. He thought social media was beneath him. Brittany scrolled sometimes, but she was too focused on Instagram aesthetics to pay attention to food TikTok. So I kept going. I made 42 videos in 3 months. Each one was a recipe, a technique, a story. Each one was a piece of evidence. Each one built my case. Then came the announcement. The Sullivan Table's 5th anniversary gala, a celebration of Chef Daniel Sullivan's culinary journey, a ticketed event with press, with food critics, with the investors who were considering the franchise deal. It was being live-streamed. It was being covered by local media. And I was not invited, but my lawyer was. My old friend Nancy, who had been the general counsel for my restaurant 20 years ago, had been helping me prepare. She helped me file the copyright claims on my recipes. She helped me document the investment that was never properly contracted. She helped me understand what I was legally entitled to. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? She asked me the week before the gala. Nancy, I said, I spent 68 years of my life being quiet when it mattered. I think I've earned the right to be loud just once. She smiled. Then let's make it count. The night of the gala, I wore the same dress I had worn to the James Beard Awards in 1995. It still fit. I did my hair the way I used to, professional but elegant. I walked into that restaurant, the one I had funded, through the front door like I owned it, because legally, I did, or at least I should have. The room was full of people in expensive clothes drinking wine I had taught Daniel how to pair. The walls were decorated with photos of dishes I had created. The menu for the tasting was entirely my recipes, lightly modified, renamed, reclaimed. I found a seat in the back. No one recognized me. Why would they? I was just an older woman, maybe someone's mother, maybe a donor. I smiled at the staff, some of whom I had trained myself. They smiled back politely, not quite placing me. Daniel took the stage. He looked good, confident, comfortable in the spotlight. He began his speech about his culinary journey, about finding his voice in the kitchen, about taking risks and trusting his instincts. And then the screen behind him changed. The slideshow that was supposed to show beautiful photos of his restaurant, his dishes, his success, suddenly showed something different. It showed the cover of my cookbook from 1998. It showed the copyright filing I had made 3 months earlier. It showed side-by-side comparisons of his menu and my recipes, identical except for the names. The room went silent. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. He turned around to look at the screen, confused. The tech crew scrambled, but Nancy had made sure they couldn't regain control. Then my voice filled the room, audio from one of my TikTok videos. I am the Invisible Chef, and this is my story. The video played for 2 minutes. 2 minutes of me explaining how I had funded this restaurant, how I had given my recipes, how I had been erased. 2 minutes of evidence, of documentation, of truth. When it ended, the lights came back up. Every phone in the room was out, recording. The press was frantically taking notes. The investors looked uncomfortable, and I stood up from my seat in the back. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice clear and steady, the same voice that had once commanded a kitchen of 15 cooks. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm Daniel's mother, and I think we need to have a conversation about whose restaurant this really is." The room erupted. Not in applause, not yet, but in murmurs, in shocked whispers, in the sound of narrative collapse. I walked to the front, and Daniel just stood there, frozen, holding the microphone like it might save him. I took it gently from his hand. "I invested $800,000 in this restaurant," I told the room. "I was promised partnership. Instead, I got exploitation. Every signature dish you've praised, I created. The Wellington, the ravioli, the bouillabaisse, even the bread service, all mine. Published in my cookbook in 1998, available on Amazon if you'd like to fact-check me in real time." I turned to Daniel. "You told a food critic you spent 40 tries perfecting the Wellington. I spent 6 years. You told investors this was your vision. It was my money. You told the world you were self-made. You were mother-made." Someone in the crowd gasped. A camera flash went off. "I'm not here for an apology," I continued. "I'm here to take back what's mine. My lawyer has filed copyright infringement claims on 14 recipes currently on your menu. I'm formally demanding the return of my $800,000 investment plus interest, as there was never a legal partnership agreement. And as for my will, which currently leaves you $3.2 million from my cookbook royalties and retirement accounts, consider it revised, effective immediately." Daniel's face went white. Brittany grabbed his arm. "That money will instead go to the Invisible Chefs Foundation, which I'm founding to support older culinary professionals who have been pushed out, stolen from, or erased by the industry that once celebrated them." I set the microphone down on the podium and looked at my son one last time. "You had everything. My recipes, my money, my support, my love. The only thing you didn't have was my permission to pretend I never existed. And that you'll never get." I walked out of that restaurant while people were still processing what had happened. Behind me, I could hear chaos, questions, the sound of the evening collapsing. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. News outlets, food blogs, other chefs offering support, people who had been following the Invisible Chef wanting to know if I was okay. I was better than okay. I was free. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Michelin-nominated chef exposed for stealing mother's recipes. The Invisible Chef reveals herself in dramatic confrontation. When a mother's love becomes a son's profit. Daniel released a statement through his PR team. It was full of words like misunderstanding and complicated family dynamics and respect for my mother's contributions. It meant nothing. The damage was done, not to me, but to him. 3 days later, I received an email from him. Just 3 sentences. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. I thought about all the birthdays I had spent alone while he built an empire on my foundations. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I thought about the years of silence I had swallowed because I loved him and I wanted him to succeed. Then I wrote back, "Sorry is just a word, Daniel. I needed action, respect, and acknowledgement. I waited too long for all 3. Now I choose peace, and peace for me means distance. I hope you learn from this, but I don't need to be part of your education anymore." I didn't hear from him again. The investors pulled out. The franchise deal fell through. The restaurant is still open, but barely. Most of the cooks I trained left to work elsewhere. The critics who once praised him now questioned everything. As for me, I took that $800,000 he paid back, plus interest, plus the settlements from the copyright claims, and I built something bigger. The Invisible Chefs Foundation now has a teaching kitchen in Portland, open 3 days a week. Older chefs, retired chefs, forgotten chefs come to teach. We film everything. We document everything. We make sure every recipe has a name attached, every technique has a story, every voice is heard. I was invited to speak at culinary schools. I did a feature on a documentary series about women in food. My cookbook was republished with a new foreword about reclaiming your narrative. Young chefs started calling me, asking to learn, wanting to understand the old ways before they were completely lost. I'm 68 years old. I have worked in kitchens since I was 16. I have burned myself, cut myself, pushed myself through pain and exhaustion and doubt. I have created dishes that brought people joy, that fed their bodies and their memories. And for a long time, I let someone else take credit because I thought that's what mothers do. We give everything and ask for nothing. But here's what I know now. Giving everything doesn't mean you have to lose yourself. Supporting someone's dream doesn't mean you have to abandon your own. And silence, the kind of silence that erases you, is not love. It's just fear with better PR. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the woman in the background of someone else's success, if you're the invisible hand that made everything possible, know this: your voice didn't disappear. It's just been waiting for permission to speak. And I'm here to tell you, you don't need anyone's permission. Not your children's, not your family's, not society's. You just need your own. I don't regret loving my son. I don't regret supporting his dream. I regret making myself invisible in the process. But here's the beautiful thing about being invisible for so long. When you finally step into the light, people pay attention. They lean in, they listen, and they remember that you were always there. You were always real. You were always worth hearing. So if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own mother, your grandmother, or a version of yourself you thought you lost, then let this be your reminder. We don't disappear. We just wait for the moment when our voice will matter most. And when that moment comes, we don't whisper. We speak clearly, loudly, and without apology. Because at 68, I've earned that right. And so have you.